In its current form, the Western Australian youth justice system acts as a revolving door. Young people enter the system and, due to a lack of constructive measures, find themselves in and out of that very system for many years. Ashleigh Small is the founder of Hello Initiative, a Perth-based charity looking to bring its revolving door to a halt. Fostering strong relationships with young Western Australians and developing landmark programs in the justice area, the organisation is one of the leading voices pushing for reform. I'm your host Louis Carlish, and this is episode 13 of the Voice of Youth podcast, our chat with Ashleigh Small of Hello Initiative. We hope you enjoy. Hello guys, welcome back. I am lucky enough to have Ashleigh from Hello Initiative here today. Ashleigh, how are you?
Hey, I'm good. How are you?
Very good, thank you. Thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.
Can't wait to get into it. So, I guess in the nicest way possible, why are you here?
You reached out on Instagram.
Yeah.
So I run a not-for-profit called Hello Initiative. So we do some work in the youth justice space in WA.
And specifically, what is Hello Initiative as an organisation, and I guess where does it target?
Yeah, so Hello Initiative is, like I said, a not-for-profit. We're a completely volunteer-led organisation, all led by young people. So everyone, like my committee, between the age of 20 and 27. And we run a number of different programs in youth justice, but really it focuses around this idea of providing practical supports to young people in the system. So recognising that the system itself is really, really complex, and that some of the issues that the young people are facing to get involved in that system are really complex, but that there's still opportunities there to make life a little bit easier and a bit easier to make those right choices and get out of the system. So we take a really practical, real life approach to support.
And like you said, it's youth justice. We don't really hear about as much as other issues in I guess youth issues, but it's a pleasure to have you here, and we can't wait to get into it. So what was for you the moment where you thought that you needed to make this organisation?
Yeah, so 2 years ago I was doing the final year of my master's degree. I was doing a social work degree, and as part of that program we had to go on prac. So off I went onto prac, and I was lucky enough to be placed in the youth justice system working on a youth engagement program. So working in a really holistic program where we supported young people to to meet all their court requirements. So that included things even like driving out to their house and picking them up so they could come into court, that sort of stuff. And I was there for 4 months full time as a student. And while I was there, I basically spent 4 months just getting increasingly more angry at the system. And increasingly more frustrated at how the system was not set up for these young kids to actually get good outcomes. And they weren't getting good outcomes. The outcomes in the WA youth justice system are pretty crappy.
Right.
And so really what happened is I had a couple of really messy, tricky days trying to work with the kids. Things like, our office was in East Perth. We were driving up to Ellenbrook trying to find kids. And so, couple of hours in commuting, couple of hours driving around the streets of Ellenbrook trying to find young people. We couldn't find them. So it wasn't a good deal for us as workers because we were wasting time. It wasn't a good deal for the kids because they weren't getting the support that they needed to get. And it was just a system that wasn't working. And I thought, this is ridiculous, because it was 2019 at the time. I was like, well, this is a problem that's already been solved. Everyone has... If I want to contact someone or go find them, I call them or I send them a text or something like that. This is not I don't have to send a letter or carry a pigeon. We have a solution for this problem. And that there was just no access to that sort of support for these young people, often coming from pretty challenging socioeconomic backgrounds. And so we saw a problem, and we also knew that electronic waste was a growing sustainability challenge in our community, and that supply to access to this tech was available all across the community. So basically we saw a problem and we could see supply and demand, and there was no one in the middle connecting those services. So it was from that we sort of ideated this idea of what has now become our flagship program called Mobile Support. And we sort of just started from there, and we had no idea what we were doing. We had this theory that if we could work with the community and get tech that no one was using anymore into the hands of these vulnerable communities, that it would support them to be able to access these services, make better decisions, and close that door, like not get stuck in that revolving door of justice. We had this idea and we thought we had to try it. So we tried it, we figured it out, or like we just slowly, very, very slowly pieced together, if that service existed, what might it look like?
Yeah.
And now
Now you're here.
Now we're here.
Amazing. Well, there was a lot of really cool things that you said there, and a lot of things that stood out. Towards the end, you talked about the revolving door.
Yeah.
Now, we hear that in a lot of, I guess, everywhere in terms of not just Australia, with youth justice and justice in general, that when people do struggle, there is that temptation to go back into where they came from, institutionalised, that revolving door. Talk about what that is.
Yeah, so it's definitely a real problem in West Australia and all over the world. Is really no international best practice model for youth justice. There is no system that's got it exactly right. There are definitely systems that are doing better than others, and systems that are doing better than our system, but there's no gold standard. And so what we see is, in Australia, we got a criminal age of responsibility of 10 years old, which is a whole other sort of Pandora's box to get into, I suppose. But young kids are getting involved in the system at a young age, usually quite, minor criminal charges. And when they become involved in that institution, it becomes really, really difficult for them to leave. So it's
like a cycle almost that you have to break.
So what we see happen is they come into the system, they get put on what we call a community order. So they don't end up in custody. They end up with a whole bunch of restrictions, but they're still living at home or living in the community. But those restrictions include things like reporting and supervision. They might have attendance, so that means that they have to go to school. They may have to attend something like, things like counselling, have a curfew. And the reality is that some of these things aren't feasible for young people. So if you are supposed to do supervision with your youth justice officer 3 times a week, but no one in your family has a car or can drive, and you don't live in an inner suburb, you live, maybe an hour and a half away from your youth justice centre, and also you're 12, it becomes really challenging to meet those requirements. So what happens is you get breached, go back to court, you get resentenced, you're going to get put on a more significant order.
That just sounds mental.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't even know that to be having those problems at 12 years old.
Yeah.
And that's a real thing. It's wow.
So it becomes this terrible cycle where you can't meet the requirements of one thing, and then as a result, you end up on like more significant,
more trouble, more
onerous requirements, until eventually, if you're unlucky, you're going to end up in custody. We've got one detention centre in Perth, in all of WA actually, called Banksia Hill. So it's boys and girls, 10 years old, all the way up to 17, sometimes 18 years old, metro, rural, remote communities, one centre in WA.
Only one.
Only one. Right. And we also know that if you get to that point and you end up incarcerated, there's a lot of trauma for young people associated with incarceration. Of course, they are associating with other young people who maybe engage in those sorts of behaviours as well. And you're away from your family, and your kids should be in schools, not locked up in prisons. And 100%. So in Banksia Hill in WA, for young people who leave Banksia Hill, 50% of them will be back within 2 years.
Ridiculous.
So that's what we are referring to when we say the revolving door of justice. So once you're in, it becomes really, really hard to get out.
50%. Between 10 and 17 as well. That is shocking.
Yeah.
And back to talking about those issues where, someone might be 12 living in a remote community and their justice officer might be an hour and a half away. It just doesn't make sense. And we saw a really cool quote from you guys. You talked about providing support relative to the real world. And I guess we can hear a sense of that, because for a 12-year-old to live an hour and a half, a low economic household, no car, how they're going to get there.
Yeah.
And I guess that's not relative to their world.
And, when I was sitting... Look, there's a lot of challenges in the youth justice system, and some of them are really, really complex and multi-causal, and we understand that reforming the whole system is like you know, it needs to be done, but it is like a big, messy, expensive process. But if you're a kid sitting in court and you're like, oh, I have to contact someone 5 times a week, 3 times a week, whatever it might be.
Might not have a phone.
You know, at that moment in time, you don't really give a shit about the legislation or like, you know, all the sort of complicated stuff around it. You just care about what you've got to do that day to do what you said to the court that you would do, so you can put this all behind you and just get on with life. And so we try and take this approach of easing those really salient, on the day, you know, just getting through each day what you need to do for young people. Because the reality is that these young people have really adult responsibilities when they get involved in the justice system. And a lot of the time, they may not have an adult in their lives that can help them to meet those requirements. So they've got to do it themselves, you know, and we've got to give them the right infrastructure to be able to make those decisions and meet those requirements and trust them to make those adult decisions.
100%. And you talked about helping them, providing them with that support in a way, and you used the example of contacting your officer, and we talked about low-income households. Maybe they might not have access to a telephone, which is relative to the real world.
Yeah.
We saw that you guys have a telephone program.
Yeah, so that's...
Why don't you talk to us about that, because that sounds completely awesome.
Yeah, so that's our flagship program, mobile support. So after my experience on placement, and I was like, this sucks, I can't get to any of my kids, I don't know where they are, this is so stupid. I was honestly like, I can't believe... Like,
it's
how
broken.
has no one solved this problem? This is ridiculous.
Yeah, right.
You know, like, what a shit show. And so I was, I tried to find a service that would offer it. And I found a couple of services that did things like, they sort of were on the right track. It was things like, loaner phones for domestic violence programs and that sort of stuff. But it wasn't what we wanted. So, yeah, we decided that, you know, really what it is in a simple form is that it's a smartphone device, recycled or refurbished, so very eco-friendly, diverted from landfill, that we refurbish, set up for the young person with all of these like supportive apps and contacts and all that sort of stuff. We take referrals from caseworkers, so they're like frontline every day working with these kids. If they see a need, they refer to us, we give them a phone, and then all of a sudden they can call their youth worker. They can do something like, they've got to go to court, they can look at the bus schedule and transfer so they know what time they have to get onto the bus so they can make it to court in time, and they can set an alarm in the morning so that they can get up and, you know, go to court. And even things like, you know, online banking, like everyone's got to manage their
probably
finances.
gives them a sense of independence, which they probably haven't had through those problems. But yeah, sorry, carry on.
No, definitely. So, you know, part of it's this bringing people into the digital community, giving them that opportunity to independently manage like their contacts and their networks and their responsibilities, but also all this practical stuff that I think a lot of adults and young people who aren't in these environments just totally take for granted. Like if you ever had one of those nights where you like go put your phone on charge and you somehow don't plug it in properly, and you wake up the next morning and your phone's on 3%, and like your whole day's off, and all of a sudden you can't check your emails and you can't check what's happening on the news, and maybe your alarm didn't go off the night before, and it just, I think like at Hell Initiative we're very pro technology. I think we can use these technologies to really scaffold ourselves into success and like making good choices. And you know, if you don't have an alarm clock and you've got to be at court at 8 o'clock and it's going to take you an hour to get there on the bus, to just do that off your own back and not be able to access that information, how do we expect young people to do that? I couldn't do that.
100%. It sounds like a really pro youth, pro relative to the real world program. What are the impacts and benefits you've seen from it? Because you explained a lot of awesome possibilities, but have you seen any yourself? Yeah,
definitely. We're so lucky to hear from the caseworkers who make these direct referrals some awesome stories of what young people have been able to do. So, for example, young people who'd previously been really struggling to be compliant on their order, perhaps on like their bail order, all of a sudden, you know, they want to make those good decisions and they want to be compliant, but they haven't had the tech. So now all of a sudden we give them access to that, you know, infrastructure, and they're fully compliant and they finish their bail, finish their order and drop out of the system, which for us is great. You know, like we want kids to be dropping out of justice. But even things like, you know, we had a client a couple of months ago who was a young mum. So she was, I think, 17 years old and recently new mother to 2 twin girls. And, you know, oh my God, imagine that. Imagine
Yeah,
being 17.
right.
I can't imagine being an adult having twin babies and trying to cope with that.
17.
Yeah.
Yeah, wow.
And so, you know, this is sort of an unforeseen benefit for us, but she was able to use her device to do things like contact her child health nurse and set up appointments with the midwife to come and visit the babies. And, you know, that sort of stuff that before, imagine to try and contact a midwife, you have to pack up everything that you need for 2 newborn twin baby girls by yourself, and then get them on the bus and then get them on the train and actually get out to see a clinician. What a nightmare that would be, when really it can just be a quick phone call to your GP, quick phone call to your child health service, and you give that person back a whole day of their time. And, you know, then hopefully she can access that health information that otherwise she might go, you know what, too much effort, I can't do that, it's too hard, I'm just going to hope that this is okay.
And most, 95% of the time, it won't be.
Yeah, so you're giving people access to these services that are out there, funded in the community. People are supposed to access these services. We're throwing so much money into these public services. We want people to actually access them.
Yeah, so there needs to be a link between these services and the people that they're trying to target.
Yeah.
But it's almost like, I guess, government policy has made it really difficult to do. An amazing programme, and that's a really inspiring story itself. You've also got other programs as well. There's a circuit breaker program which we've done a lot of reading on, which is outstanding. Please explain to the listeners what that is as well.
So we have Mobile Support, our flagship program, and then we have Circuit Breaker. So Circuit Breaker is our in-house innovation engine. So at HI, we're really all about this idea of doing things differently.
Yeah.
If we had solved these problems in youth justice, if the government or big organisations knew the answers to these problems, we wouldn't have these problems anymore. So we think that it's really important that we recognise new models of care, new approaches to support are needed to solve these big, wicked, hairy problems that we have in the community. So Circuit Breaker is sort of a catch-all term for all of these different pilots that we're running. So, for example, we also run a cyber safety workshops program. Really, that program is like pro-social mentoring in disguise. So we take the kids out in person, we do a workshop on critical digital literacy, cyber safety skills. Like if we're giving these kids a phone and access to the internet, maybe they haven't had that before, we want to make sure we're also giving them the skills to be able to navigate that and keep themselves safe and keep others safe online. So we do a bit of a workshop. It's like experiential learning, and then we take them out and do an activity. So just recently, like 2 weeks ago, we went to Bounce.
Yes.
Kids loved it. We loved it. It was 2 weeks ago. I'm still sore. Like it was trampolining is no joke, hey?
Good workout.
But it also gives the kids an opportunity to mix with some adults, but really young adults.
Yeah, definitely.
Who sit somewhere between being a peer and being
a friend,
like like an authority figure. Like it's like a big brother, big sister.
Yeah, that's it.
Like we're not your teacher, but we look a little bit. We're like a bit closer in age, and so that's one program that we run. We're also about to launch a food relief program at the Children's Court.
Talk us about that.
Oh, yeah, so exciting. Get to talk about breakfast food all the time.
Oh, please, that's best meal of the day. Come on.
So it came to our attention about a year ago that there was an ongoing challenge at Children's Court where young people were showing up and they hadn't had a feed in a couple of days. And we also know that a lot of the young people involved in the system may have existing cognitive challenges.
Right.
And basically the logistics of going to court were really complex. So when you go to court, you didn't get given a time. It's not like you got a specific appointment. Hey, you'll be seen at 10:30. So you had to show up and you didn't know how long you were going to be waiting.
Right.
So if you're 14 and you haven't had a feed in a couple of days and you don't know how long you're going to be waiting, like, I don't know about you, but if I haven't had breakfast in the morning, I'm useless.
Can't function.
Nah,
Can't
don't
function.
talk to me.
I agree.
And so what we want is we want kids to show up.
Yeah.
We want them to stay while they're there and actually not, give up halfway through the waiting process and go home, and then they've missed court and they may be issued with an arrest warrant. And we also want them to pay attention when in their courtroom so that they know what's expected of them and what they have to do to get out of this system, and we don't want them to just sit there but they're not listening.
Yeah, it's like Snickers.
Yeah,
when you're
literally.
hungry.
Exactly.
But no, it's very true. Very
Maybe
true.
we should ask Snickers to sponsor the program.
Oh, mate, Snickers, if you're listening, please.
So we decided we were going to pilot a breakfast program.
Yeah.
So that's really exciting. We've actually just recruited a new project lead for that program, and that kicks off on the 16th of August. So free breakfast food for all the young people and their families and their siblings and anyone who needs it in the court, trying to ease that process. And again, we know that the cognitive challenges, well, that's a whole complex and messy system, but giving you a feed before you go to court, like if I can figure out at Hello Initiative how to get you an iPhone, I'm sure we can figure out how to get you a banana.
Yeah, 100%.
So it just makes sense.
Yeah.
It's just like an easy program. And we looked at what was happening in low socioeconomic schools and sort of drew a model off of that. So
you've gone out there and saw it for yourself, and you've almost directly found the link. I mean, I can't imagine being 14, possibly going in by myself to a big government building.
Big scary building,
starving, hungry, dying of thirst. Well, not dying, but super thirsty.
Yeah.
And then having to listen to an old bloke or an old woman who you just... Yeah,
and you've waited a couple of hours.
I mean, in school, after recess, like an hour after I was starving again, and I couldn't listen to my teacher. That's what I used to, kind of made as an excuse for my bad marks, but at the same time, 100%. And I guess you talked about being different, but there's not many, I guess, organisations like yourselves in WA. Do you think that might be part of the problem?
I think so. Look, working in the youth justice sector is really challenging, because it's not, as we were talking about before, it's not cute. It's not like it's a really gritty agency. And we recognise that some of the things that our young people that we work with have been involved in are not the kind of activities and behaviours that we want to endorse. But what we really believe at HI is that we can support the young person without endorsing the behaviour that they're getting involved in. Like, it's hard enough to be a teenager at any point in time, let alone
Tell me about it.
Coming from a complex system, coming from a complex family background, potentially exposed to things like trauma and poverty. And so although it's challenging and it's difficult, and some of the stuff these kids have done is really terrible, they're still kids. Everyone makes mistakes. And we think it's much better for us to see that and support young people to make better choices so that they become productive adults in our community, rather than getting embedded in this system and not becoming productive adults in our community.
100%.
And so...
let's not look at the problem, look at the solution.
Yeah. And, there's so much resilience in these communities. Like, these kids are really, really smart. They're so resilient. Like, some of the things that they've gone through are so challenging, and they're still, showing up every day at life. And they deserve that from their community. They deserve the community to turn around and go, no, this isn't fair. Something about this system has to change. And just because it's not cute and it's not fluffy and it is, gritty and challenging, someone's got to show up and do that work. And so I think work done in sectors such as health and education is so important. But at the same time, there's lots of organisations working in those sectors. Yeah. Justice, we're lucky to have some amazing agencies out there, but compared to something like health or ed, really it's a bit of a desert of sources. So really underserved community.
So overall, we talked about maybe not the actual issue getting enough viewpoint. Do you think funding and legislation also could be improved? I mean, it's probably a long thing to get into, but are there any big things and obvious things that you could maybe mention that need to be done?
100%. I mean, so Hello Initiative is a signatory to the Raise the Age campaign, which is a big media campaign happening all across Australia at the moment. Yeah. And that's about taking some responsibility for our age of criminal culpability in Australia. So in Australia, the age of criminal culpability, so from age from which you can be held legally accountable for any criminal behaviour, is 10 years old. Right. International, it's gross. Like, 10-year-old is like, oh my God, a baby.
I can't even remember what I was doing at 10.
No. And international standards suggest that should be 14.
Right.
That at 14 years of age, you definitely have the capacity to assess right from wrong, to think about long-term consequences and make decisions that you can be held accountable for, not 10 years
That's
old.
4 years different. I mean, obviously, if it was like 1 or 2, you'd be like, maybe, but 4 years, that's huge.
It's half of their life when you're 10.
Yeah.
And even then, there are still countries around the world where that age sits at 16 or 18, or models that are sort of mixed models where there's some criminal acts you can be held responsible for at younger, but others you can't until you're a bit older.
Have they been proven to be more successful as well?
I mean, it's hard to measure success.
Yeah, right.
Like, as we said, there's no perfect system.
No.
And it is a complex issue. We understand why criminal responsibility is contentious. But at the same time, we don't think that the risks of raising the age of criminal responsibility are significant enough to justify incarcerating 10-year-olds.
Yeah, right.
That is
Ridiculous.
an enormous amount of trauma.
Yeah.
It's, you know, in Australia, where we have such a long history of Aboriginal incarceration and overrepresentation, and by far majority, a lot of the young, like Aboriginal young kids are overrepresented in our systems, and it's really contributing to, you know, a stolen generation.
Yeah.
And so, yes, we understand that there are risks, but we do not think that those risks come close to justifying that system.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the big ones at the moment in terms of issues that need to change. The other one that I would say is really contentious is mandatory sentencing.
Okay.
So mandatory sentencing is when, according to legislation, magistrates must impose a minimum sentence for particular criminal acts, right? And one of those in WA is that if you get charged with 3 counts of burglary, you must be incarcerated. You cannot go into a community order. And mandatory sentencing sucks because it removes the discretion of the magistrate to actually look at the context around that behaviour. So we've seen young people who have been, you know, committed 3 counts of burglary, but what they've burgled from homes has been food, or their co-offenders have been their dad. And looking at that and understanding the context, you can appreciate that that young person probably does not pose any risk to the community. And yet, because of mandatory sentencing, the magistrate cannot consider those things, must put that young person into custody.
And then could be is life-changing. And it's threatening to take away.
Yeah, you're just like turbocharging their journey through the justice system, throwing them right in the deep end. So, you know, not to say that we think a Hello Initiative that, like, you know, there are really serious criminal acts out there that people do need to be incarcerated for, but mandatory sentencing removes the discretion of the magistrate or the judge to think about how that crime happened and what's actually going to be in the best interests of both the community and that person to make sure that they actually can reform. And so, you know, what a crappy legislation. You know, it's this like tough on crime mentality that unfortunately can be really popular across both sides of politics, that wins elections but doesn't change communities. That's got to change.
Yeah, so there are 2 big things. Do you think that everyday people can, obviously we can spread awareness, we can try and make it a more known issue, but are there any things that as a normal group of people that maybe not as educated as, well, definitely not as educated as you guys are, what can we do to help?
So in terms of those like big community-wide issues, there's an excellent campaign going on nationally at the moment called #RaiseTheAge, and in WA it's being coordinated by Social Reinvestment WA, and they're currently running a campaign. All the information's on their website.
We'll put that in the link as well.
Yeah, excellent. Where you can, they're coordinating like a campaign to your local members about pushing for this legislative change in Parliament. I mean, change comes from the people. These policies get put in place because they win elections, and we need to make them not election-winning policies anymore.
Definitely.
And so, yes, I would definitely recommend jumping on board that campaign. So there's a huge peak body of organisations, including Hello Initiative, that have signed on, but anyone, everyday people, can go in and join that campaign to, you know, really drive this issue to the forefront for your local members and ministers.
What do you think the public perception of this issue is?
it's really challenging.
Yeah.
It's really polarizing.
Yeah.
So there are lots of amazing organisations and individuals out there that see this for what it is, which is young people being put into a crap system and then having their entire lives be marked by their engagement in that
defined
system.
by that system, yeah.
But it's challenging because there's a lot of the community out there that have this mentality of, do the crime, do the time.
Yeah.
Lock them up.
And without even looking at the context or where they're from as well.
Yeah. And I understand that. I understand that people feel like they want to be safe and they feel that they haven't done anything wrong. They deserve to feel safe in their community, and that if you're doing something wrong, there should be a punishment with it. But I would encourage people who have that view to think more broadly about the impact of this for young people, because the reality is that it might make you feel safer in the short term to lock up young people, teenagers who've gotten involved in this system. But all you're doing there is building adult communities of people who have not been able to exit that system. And that doesn't make your community safer in the long run. If we can intervene when young people are kids and provide them with those mentors and provide them with that stability, and we know that young people can reform, and we know that your brain is still maturing until you're 25 and you can make significant change. I think it's like 28 now that supposedly your brain stops developing. That's going to be a much safer community in the long run. And the other thing to consider is that this system is very expensive. Very, very expensive. One night in Banksia Hill Detention Centre, this is according to last year's data, one night for one young person costs $1,339. That's a really nice hotel, right? That's like a really nice hotel.
Do they provide you with 5-course meals there and 5-star Netflix, all that? And
so how expensive? You think about the amount of tax, and these are taxpayer-funded institutions.
Yeah.
Money is being sunk into these institutions. So it doesn't matter. For context, a year on the mobile support program at HI, a whole year is $400 per young person. So if I can keep one young person out of Banksia Hill for one night, it pays for 3.5 young people on my program for a year, right? So it doesn't matter if you count this in terms of the people or if you count this in terms of the dollars. It makes sense to invest in intervention programs when people are younger to get better outcomes for your budget and for your community.
Yeah. Oh, wow. And specifically, we'll talk about your organisation quickly. What's coming next for you? So you talked about that new programme coming through Food for Courts.
Yeah.
Is there any other events or anything interesting coming in the works?
Oh, yeah, we have another programme due to launch in November.
Right. Keep your eyes peeled for that then.
Smart Casual Clothing Bank.
Yeah.
So you might have heard of Dress for Success, but these are programs out there where people down on their luck can go get suits for job interviews and stuff, which is awesome, but doesn't suit you if you're 15. Doesn't suit you.
No, definitely not.
So instead we're launching a program that's not suits, but also not slides and leggings.
No.
Smart casual clothes for young people to be able to access to have important court dates or school interviews or job interviews or that sort of stuff. So that's coming up in November through Circuit Breaker. We've just undergone a massive expansion at HI.
Yes.
So we've got an amazing team. I've got 17 colleagues now. Yeah.
Awesome.
So always new big things to come at HI.
Amazing. And your socials as well on Instagram.
At Hello Initiative.
Brilliant.
Facebook and Instagram. LinkedIn if that's your thing.
Super. We'll get all that. We'll plug all those out there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Ash, you've been absolutely fantastic. A real eye opener again for me as well. I feel like I'm just getting free education for all these that I'm doing. So thank you. A huge thank you for not just coming on here, but everything you're doing. And we really hope that you guys in the future keep continuing to bring change, and hopefully we'll see some results soon.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me.
No worries. Have a wonderful rest of the weekend. Guys, thank you so much for listening. We hope you are safe and well. I've been Louis Carlish, and this has been The Voice of Youth. Thank you, guys.